book, and they didn't know anything about his book. In other words, this was a coincidence. Because, yeah. But coincidence, right? So anyway, the hero had this device with 2 electrodes, and every night when he'd go to sleep, he'd put these electrodes on his temples, and then he had a little big device, and he'd dial in, he'd dial in the world news, and then he'd go to sleep, and as he slept, it would transmit all the news that's fit to know from around the world into his brain. And when he woke up in the morning, he would know everything happening in the world. He could also program a dream into the device, or language learning, whatever he wanted, physics, chemistry, whatever the latest thing he needed to know. And of course, since I had a thirst for knowledge, because those little UFO people kept coming back in my dreams and telling me that they were going to kill me and everyone on Earth if I didn't match up. So I thought I'd like to have one of those little electrode things, because then I could really pump the stuff in. So 6 months later, 6 months after reading this book, I built a device that became known as the neurophone. It's N-E-U-R-O-P-H-O-N-E, neurophone. And basically, it had 2 electrodes. I'll draw it out for you here. It had like 2 electrode plates, about 3 inches in diameter, made out of copper. And over the tops of these plates, I put mylar insulation, like a real thin plastic film. This made it into a capacitor. And then I'd put those plates on my temples, on my head. This is a nose, but that's representing a head. Okay, and then they were connected to an output circuit like this, which then went to a radio transmitter, which was a 40 kilohertz. That's a low frequency radio transmitter. 40 kilohertz amplitude modulated with a microphone or input or whatever. And basically, these put out 3,000 volts peak to peak across the plates at 40 kilohertz. See, this is again a Tesla kind of device, because it was high frequency, but not like super high. It's just 40 kilohertz. Double the highest frequency that humans can hear normally. And so 3,000 volts peak to peak across these plates at 40 kilohertz, amplitude modulated. And any sound that was fed into this device you could hear right in the middle of your head like it was a thought. And these electrodes are incredibly efficient, and you could not hear anything else. In other words, if you stood next to a person listening to this neurophone, you couldn't hear any of the modulation. Only the person wearing it could hear it. And in other words, it produced no sound at all. There was only one thing that we observed which bothered us over the years, and now we know what that answer is, but is that if you took a stethoscope, like a medical stethoscope, and you put it anywhere on the person's body as they were listening to the neurophone, you could hear the modulation. You could hear the sound, but only if you put a stethoscope on their body. But if you stood next to a person, you couldn't hear it. Now, I thought, to me, this device was what Hugo Gernsback was talking about in his book. And as a child, anything that I wanted, basically, I used to started my first, and before 11 actually, I became interested, because of all those thousands of books and things I was reading, I became very interested in yoga and in Tibetan kind of knowledge, and I read Rorik, and yes?
Patrick, I'm sorry, but we have a momentary emergency.
Okay.
Could I have
Absolutely.
a minute?
Yeah.
Now, how did you know to move your car and don't get home?
Yeah. Yes?
What was special about 40 kilohertz?
40 kilohertz?
Is this arbitrary, or is there a reason for that?
Well, I experimented with different frequencies all the way up to several hundred kilohertz, and 40 kilohertz was the best frequency for this phenomenon from my limited capacities in my limited little lab as a child. And there's another side of me which is a kind of an esoteric side. I had studied the books of Rorik, and I had studied all kinds of different yoga books and meditation books and things like that, and Kundalini books, and by the time I was 11, 12 years old, and had studied Indra Devi and had worked with her and developed yoga routines, which I did regularly, and meditation routines by the time I was 11. And so I also would go into a state and go to what I consider to be the cosmic library. Now, the entry into the cosmic library doesn't come easily because I would want to create something, and I'd have to work on it really hard. I'd work on it and work on it and work on it until I was absolutely frustrated at not getting the answer. And then I'd just forget all about it and then go to the cosmic library while I was asleep, and the information would be given to me, and then I'd know the answer the next day. And that's been all my life, it's been that way. I'll work really hard on something, I mean to the point where it consumes me, and then if I don't get the answer, I'll just forget about it. Totally. I won't even think about it, and then suddenly it'll come to me like that, and it'll be laid out before me in a way that is so clear that there's no doubt about how to do something. And that happened with the Neurophone. I worked really hard on this device for 6 months, and then I knew how to build it. And so we now know, for example, with the Neurophone through PET scans. PET scan is where a PET scan is positron emission thermography. Isn't that? Yeah, that's it. And a PET scan measures the activity in the brain. And basically it tells what part of the brain is activated at different times, so like blood flow and what areas of the brain are activated. And one of the things that we did is we took headphones and we played a sound through headphones and did a PET scan of their head. And we saw that the headphones were activating the area known as short-term memory, the audio centers of the brain associated with short-term acoustic memory. And then we took the Neurophone, put that on a person's head, played the same sound, did another PET scan, same person, same sound. And this time, the areas of the brain that were activated were those areas associated with long-term memory, with the long-term memory centers of the brain. So we now know that the Neurophone goes to other areas of the brain not associated with the ears. It's another channel for information into the brain. And when anything you listen to through the Neurophone goes directly into long-term memory, so you learn things much quicker with the Neurophone than you do otherwise. Because we have these filters, we have built-in filters in our hearing circuits, and the built-in filters basically say that you know, we hear things all around us all the time, and it goes in and then it goes out, and we never actually permanently record that information. It doesn't stay with us. It only stays with us if we take a sound or we take something and we learn it and we listen to it over and over and over again 5 or 6, 10 times, and then the brain says, boy, he's paying a lot of attention to this sound. This must mean it's important, and it transfers it into long-term memory, and then you don't forget it. And that's how we learn languages, by rote. You study the language over and over and over again, the words over and over and over until they're memorized. Well, memorization is nothing more than the transferring of information from short-term memory to long-term memory. The Neurophone puts it right into long-term memory right away, so it's very easy to learn with the Neurophone. We have people, for example, now, and I'll go back to this older story later, but we have people now who are doctors, lawyers, and various other real estate people, various other people who have to pass state bar exams or state whatever exams in order to get licenses, state licensing exam, and have failed these exams. And all they did is they took all their notes and they took a tape recorder and they read all their course notes or whatever into the tape recorder, put it on, went to sleep, got up the next day, went in and passed the exam with A's. In other words, with virtually no mistakes, just by using the Neurophone. So we know the Neurophone is a long-term memory device. Now, Hugo Gernsback, when I invented the Neurophone, Hugo Gernsback was in his 80s. And he died, I'm not sure how old he was when he died, but I think he was either 100 or close to it. But a few years after I invented the Neurophone, Hugo Gernsback wrote me a letter thanking me for inventing the final device that he predicted in his book. No one, in other words, he predicted all these modern things, but no one had created that device. And he even recognized that the Neurophone was that from all the publicity I got on it, because I never communicated with him or anything. So it was quite an interesting coincidence that he wrote me a letter finally before he died and thanked me for creating the final device that he had created, which is very interesting. Now, the thing about the neurophone is that if you were to take now I applied for a patent. I wrote my own patent application when I was 13, and I made all my diagrams and wrote the whole thing up, sent it into the patent office, and the patent office wrote back and said, well, we won't give you a patent because no one's ever invented anything like this before, and therefore it can't possibly work. But boy, was that a surprise to me. I thought inventions were supposed to be new things. No, they're just supposed to be improvements over old things. If you invent a new thing, they don't want to give you a patent on it. They say it can't possibly exist because it doesn't already exist, which is a catch-22. So for years I would write the patent office and they'd write back, and later when I could afford a lawyer and so forth, my lawyer would write them back and forth. And finally they dropped my application after years and years, and they said, we will not give you a patent, we're closing the file. So my lawyer, in a last-ditch attempt, grabbed me and we took a neurophone and we flew to Washington and we demonstrated the neurophone on a profound deaf employee of the patent office who heard for the first time in his life first time in 15 years with it. And the patent examiner reopened the file, which had been officially closed, and gave me the patent with my original filing date, which had never been done in the history of the patent office before or since. It's the only time they ever did that, where they took a closed file and reopened it again and gave a patent. And so in fact, years ago I was invited to the patent office. They made me inventor of the year or something, and invited me to the patent office for a big invention thing in Washington, and the examiner that originally examined the patent talked about it, and we all, smiled and so forth. But the thing about the original neurophone is that if you were to try to put this on the market, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Number one, anything that puts 3,000 volts across a person's head would scare them, even though this was 40 kilohertz and it's not really dangerous, okay? But if the mylar covering on the electrodes got a little hole in it, like a little tiny tear, you'd get a little zap to your head, and it wouldn't hurt you because the signal goes over the surface of the skin, but because it would be concentrated energy like sunlight. Sunlight focused over your whole body doesn't hurt you, but if you take that whole area of sunlight and you focus it to a pinpoint, that'll hurt you. So it's the same thing here. If you focus that 40 kilohertz, 3,000 volts through a little pinprick in the mylar, then you get an RF burn. You get a little burn on your head. It doesn't hurt, but, well, it does hurt, and it stays for a while. So you don't want to try to sell that to the public, because when you do, you put that on the market, and they get a little prick in the mylar, and pretty soon people are saying, well, you've now destroyed my brain. And so you couldn't do anything with the neurophone because of that 3,000 volts, 40 kilohertz. So I went to work for the Navy. Vietnam was in full motion, and by the time I was 17 years old, Vietnam was in full motion and everything, and I was very good draft potential, and I was a gymnast. I was in perfect physical condition, and